Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined by my partner in crime, Wes Hodkiewicz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. Wes, it's time to preview Packers Cowboys. It will be a 3:25 p.m. Central Time kickoff on Sunday at Lambeau Field. We all know where the Packers are. 5 straight losses, 3-6, trying to get back in the win column. The Dallas Cowboys are 6-2. Right in the thick of the playoff chase in the NFC, and this is a team that is 6-1 since an opening loss in Week 1, and their only loss since Week 1 is to the undefeated Philadelphia Eagles. They have wins over the Bengals, the Giants, and the Rams among those in the meantime. We obviously were hoping the Packers would get things turned around before this. But if they can get it turned around against the Dallas Cowboys and get back in the win column, this would be a significant victory because this is a Cowboys team that is playing awfully well and coming off of their bye week.
It's time. The Packers need to get one here, Mike. You and I have talked about it for 5 straight weeks. It has been a grind here for this football team trying to get back into the win column. And what you and I said going into this game against Detroit last Sunday was that this road does not get any easier. After Dallas, it's Tennessee. We know what Derrick Henry can do.
On a short week, no less.
On a short week. Philadelphia is the best in the business. Even Chicago is not looking like the game it was 2 months ago. The Green Bay Packers have to take care of business on Sunday if they are going to make a run here towards a playoff spot and get back within this NFC conference race. The difficult thing when you look at Dallas on paper is they're just so dynamic in a multitude of different areas. I mean, it's not that they are the deepest team in the NFL, but between Dak Prescott, their 2 running backs, CeeDee Lamb, you look at those defenders. Micah Parsons might be the best in the game right now, most versatile for sure.
Probably the front runner right now. It's only halfway through the season, but the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year, most likely in the NFL, and Micah Parsons.
His statistics just jump off the page because It's not just the sacks, it's the pressures, it's the interceptions, it's the takeaways, it's the guy can hurt you in so many different ways. Trayvon Diggs is one of the best ball hawks in the game right now. So the Packers have their work cut out for them against Mike McCarthy's team here, and the only way you can slice this is Packers are going to be the underdogs here this week, next Thursday, probably the week after that. Regardless of the outcome of these games, you have to find a way.
Well, with the injury earlier this season to Dak Prescott, it seemed as though the Cowboys, with Cooper Rush, the backup, filling in, and they went 4-0. I believe it was 4-0 in Prescott's absence with Cooper Rush at quarterback. It's almost as though they found their identity in that this is a team that is based on its defense. These guys are ranked 3rd in the league in points allowed. And the statistic that absolutely jumps off the page to me that I mentioned in our 3 Things video that we shot after Wednesday's practice, these guys are plus 21 in sack differential. They have 33 sacks in 8 games while only allowing 12 on the other side. That says something about how they are winning in the trenches on a consistent basis week after week. Micah Parsons leads the way with 8 sacks. They have 3 other guys with 4+ on the season on the way to that total of 33. And you mentioned Trayvon Diggs. He had the big year with all the interceptions last year. Not quite as many this year, but still has 3 leading the team. He's the guy. He's sort of the takeaway guy with that defense. And a lot of what the Cowboys have been able to accomplish when you look at the numbers is this is a team that starts fast and finishes strong. They have outscored opponents 46-15 in the first quarter and 54-23 in the fourth quarter. They get on you in a hurry and then they finish the game late. That's why these guys are 6-1 since dropping an opening week ball game, I believe it was to Tampa Bay.
Yeah, and if you look at this situation, Mike, where, that first year Mike McCarthy gets there, he hires Mike Nolan as his DC. Things don't really go in the right direction for them in year 1. Dan Quinn becomes available after his, separation from Atlanta. And with everything that's happened over the last 10 years, we've kind of forgotten about that lineage of Seattle defensive coordinators and what they did and how many guys got head coaching jobs out of that position.
Yeah.
Quinn was one that basically helped start that wave. And I think when listening to Matt LaFleur, who worked for Quinn for 2 years in Atlanta, hearing not only the impact he made in terms of how they go about building a football team and having a basketball hoop in their conference, their team meeting room, that's something that started with Quinn. But the way in which Quinn continually evolves his scheme, every place he's been, his defense has looked a little bit different, trying to stay on the front edge of that wheel of parity in this league. And, you go through the names, just if we can, for this defense. Micah Parsons, obviously. DeMarcus Lawrence is having a fantastic year for them. Leighton Vander Esch is a guy that I've felt for years is one of the more underrated off-ball linebackers in this league. Anthony Barr is there now. Jaron Kearse. Dante Fowler has 4 sacks this season for them. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of names. And being able to have guys sort of step up and play to the scheme, I think has been the real hallmark for them so far, and Quinn really getting the most out of these players. Certainly you throw in an athlete like Parsons, that you see it all the time, what a superstar can do for a defense, but they got a lot of guys that are stepping up along with him.
Yeah, but you make a great point with regard to Quinn, because even when Parsons was drafted out of Penn State and was first kind of trying to find his way with the Cowboys defense, everybody was wondering, well, like, where does this guy fit? Like, what's he going to do? Well, enter Dan Quinn, and it's not about where does Micah Parsons fit. It's about just how do we use him, and that's how Quinn has gone about it, and he has turned Parsons in a very short time into a superstar in this league. He is the guy that jumps off the film. He is the guy you have to have a target on when you game plan against this defense, and they use him. Dan Quinn uses him in so many different ways, and as you said, you rattled off all the other names. There's a heck of a cast out there defensively for the Cowboys that Quinn has to play with as well. On the offensive side, I know there are some questions as far as whether or not Ezekiel Elliott is going to be available this week. We will have to see with regard to that. But Tony Pollard, he's averaging 6.2 yards per carry, Wes. I mean, you talk about how, and I mentioned that obviously the defense is kind of the foundation and the way they built this team with Prescott's injury and Cooper Rush playing quarterback. But Tony Pollard averaging 6 yards a carry is going to help out any quarterback. I don't care if it's Prescott or Rush in there under center. This is a team that can run the football when it wants to, and but also has the big play weapons in CeeDee Lamb. Jake Ferguson, the former Wisconsin tight end, has a couple touchdowns the last couple weeks for this Dallas offense. They have a lot of different places they can turn. It doesn't all fall on Dak Prescott now that he's back, and it didn't all fall on Cooper Rush, which is why they were able to win games without Prescott.
This is what is so unfair about what Dallas has done this season. Look at Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard. Pollard almost reminds me a little bit of like that MJD after Fred Taylor, like some of these places that had a real name running back, but then there was a young guy that just sort of came up behind him.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to disrespect Zeke at all. He could play in this game. He could easily go off for 150 yards. But there's a reason why so many people are talking about that platoon and that two-headed monster, because Pollard has literally inserted himself into that conversation against one of the league's most noteworthy and named running backs.
Yeah.
But it's not just that, right? Michael Gallup is banged up. They have guys stepping up at receiver. Dalton Schultz is not having the season he had last year. He's also battled some injuries. Well, then Jake Ferguson, as you said, has 2 touchdowns this season. Where they've needed guys to step up, Cooper Rush is the number one example of that. But at the skill positions, at some of the other areas where they've lost a star, a bona fide starter, or that player's just been banged up, they've had guys respond to that. So I think that's a credit to Mike McCarthy. I think that's a credit to Kellen Moore for making the most of those offensive weapons that he has. And also you have to give credit to the Jones family and the front office being able to acquire a lot of rich talent for this team The deeper you are, the better you're going to do handling those injuries.
Yeah, well, I want to get to the keys to victory for the Packers here in a minute, but first, a little bit of sponsor business. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousins Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousins Subs, 50 years of better. All right, keys to victory for the Packers coming into this one. I don't like to berate the obvious, but I think this game, with as banged up as the Packers are at receiver, we know things are still somewhat in flux on the offensive line. I think Aaron Rodgers has to have the type of bounce-back game that he has had regularly throughout his career. He threw 3 interceptions for the first time in 5 seasons. But when he's had those rough games, he generally has bounced back with a really, really, really strong performance, and the Packers are absolutely 100% going to need that from number 12 on Sunday.
And this team desperately just needed to get home. Now, you have to make the most out of this. It's not perfect. 5 days, 2 games, it's still going to be a challenge, and you know the opponent waiting on the other side of it. But we saw the way they looked throughout this stretch of 4 road trips in 5 weeks. It just, every week, it just seemed like a little bit more energy was being zapped out of them. The injuries started to mount a little bit more. Well, now you kind of get to catch your breath again. And you getting back to the Rodgers situation, I really think this game is going to come down to turnovers, takeaways, and ball control. I said a lot of positive things about the Dallas Cowboys. The fact of the matter is their passing game hasn't been overly dynamic this year. They have been kind of one-dimensional. They've dedicated themselves to the run a little bit more and making the most of those short yardage and situational opportunities. One of the reasons they've been able to do that is they haven't had a ton of takeaway, or they haven't had a ton of giveaways, and they have a defense that is leading the league in sacks, is being able to pressure the opposition. They're winning as a complete football team. The Packers need to do that to be able to win this game on Sunday. I think it starts with Rodgers. I think it starts with being able to not only move the football again. That if you could take 389 yards and just plop it into this game with maybe a little bit more rushing offense, perfect. You get inside the red zone, you have to convert that into points. Packers came up short there against Detroit. That area has to get kind of flushed out here now against the Cowboys.
I think another big area in this game, and I guess I bring it up because the Packers are facing the Cowboys, and one of Mike McCarthy's challenges this year as the head coach at Dallas was to cut back on the penalties, because Dallas last year was flagged like crazy, and all those flags that flew in the opening playoff game against San Francisco, that's why the Cowboys got knocked out in that round as early as they did. And there were some penalty issues early this season with the Cowboys as well, but those numbers have come down. During this 5-game losing streak, the Packers have been penalized way too many times. Some games it's been the last couple games, the personal fouls are the ones that have stood out the most. Before that, there was holding and false start issues and things like that. It always seems to be every game there is some penalty category that sort of bites the Packers in the rear end, and they've got to be able to get rid of that. You can't continue to play 4 quarters and look at the stats at the end and see that you had 8 or 9 penalties called against you, when there are always going to be a couple of penalties that are declined as well. Those are just the accepted ones.
Yeah,
that's the shoot yourself in the foot kind of stuff that the Packers continue to do. It comes back to playing clean football on both sides of the ball and not just giving yardage away to your opponents, because the Packers have done that too much the last month.
The big thing I look at, through these games so far this season, last year nullified yards through 17 games, 165. This season they're already at 144. When you look at, being able to start on first down, avoiding a holding penalty there, avoiding a false start, the procedural stuff that Matt LaFleur's talked about. There was some times this year, it didn't happen last week, but there's been some times, especially during this losing streak, where you've seen them have illegal formation penalties that just they didn't have during the first couple seasons underneath Matt LaFleur.
Yeah.
And then certainly, a player gets to the sideline, you get him out of bounds, you got to be careful there. You have to be able to avoid that. some things are going to happen. We talked with Kingsley Enagbare about this at his locker on Wednesday. He's going in for a sack. Goff is going down. You got to be more mindful of his hands. He's admitting that, but it's a moving target game. Some things, unfortunately, are going to happen, but it's the discipline penalties. It's the ones that are going to tack on an extra 15 yards to an 11-yard run. I mean, it's those type of things. Those are explosive plays, Mike.
Yeah.
And when you tilt the field like that, it gives the opponent a real opportunity not only to get points, but zap that momentum in their favor.
Well, the Packers obviously are dealing with a number of injuries on both sides of the ball. We will see by the end of practice on Friday when the final injury report comes out just where things stand with all these players. But with what we know about the injury situation, who are the guys that you see being forced into a larger role and more playing time than they've gotten in the past, and the guys that have to, young guys that have to seize this opportunity, not only to help the Packers, but potentially for their own careers?
Well, it starts with Enagbare because, Mike, for 2.5 years, you and I have been talking about, okay, you had the Smith Bros and you had Gary. Who else is going to be the guy? And now they're at a situation where you have Preston, and without Rashawn Gary potentially here for the rest of the season, who's going to step up? Enagbare is a guy that I think, and you touched on this too with some of your writings, he's made steady improvement every week.
Yep,
and I think that's what you're looking for from him. Defends the run well. It was really interesting listening to him lay out his thought process, right? Because his number one thing as he's going through the preseason is he's like, I'm not really facing a whole lot of like starting NFL tackles, right? I'm going up against guys that may be in the league, maybe on practice squads, maybe won't even make the National Football League this season. But he said what that first sack against Tampa Bay did for him is it proved to him in his mind that, okay, I can not only hold my own, that was the first step, I can make plays against these guys. And he said the next step, something that Rashawn Gary talks about, a lot of the guys talk about, the veterans talk about on this team, is finding dominance, moments where you're going to dominate the opposition. Enagbare, other than maybe that 40 time, Mike, there was so much to like about him coming out of South Carolina. Didn't have like a 25 sack season or anything, but just was a very consistent, steady guy, has great size for the position. And he's going to be the next man up here. Jonathan Garvin, Tipa Nalii potentially coming back here, Ladarius Hamilton. There are other outside linebackers there. But ultimately, when you're looking for the guy that's probably going to be starting opposite Preston Smith, it starts with Enagbare.
And you have to think that offenses without Gary on the field, offenses are gonna shade their protection to Preston Smith's side. If there are one-on-ones on the other side, whether it's Enagbare or Garvin, or if Nalii comes off of injured reserve and gets some snaps there, you've got to be able to win that one-on-one and get that offense to pay attention to the pass rush on the other side as well. I think offensively, we know Randall Cobb is still out. Romeo Doubs, it sounds like he's going to be out for at least a few weeks. Christian Watson has exited each of the last 2 games, 2 weeks ago with a concussion. Last week, precautionary, as we talked about on our last show, turned out it was not a concussion. It was actually a shot to the chest that knocked the wind out of him. Packers are going to need Christian Watson. I know he hasn't been able to play as much as they would like and as much as he would like. He doesn't have the experience level based on all the time that he's missed that everybody was hoping that Christian Watson, as the number 34 overall pick in the draft, would have at the midpoint of the season. But you kind of, in a way, you kind of have to throw that out the window and say, Christian Watson, this is your time. This team really, really needs you right now. And I look for the young man to make an impact on Sunday if the Packers are going to have a shot here.
Different round, different year, and different expectations, but in some ways it kind of is that callback to what Marquez Valdez-Scantling had to do in 18. And it was one of the reasons why when people get on MVS about his drops, I always was kind of like, are you guys are you ridiculous here? Because one, he was a 5th-round pick. Anything you get out of him there is a plus. But two, it was the dimension that he brought to the offense.
Yep.
And he was thrown into a position to make plays that a lot of 5th-round picks, especially in a contending team like the Packers expected to be that year, they're typically not put into those spots. That's where Watson is right now. I mean, you look at that injury report on Wednesday for Green Bay, Mike, it's expansive.
Yep.
Now, we'll see what they do at the end of this week. There's some options with the practice squad. We'll see here, next week, next Thursday, Randall Cobb would be eligible. That'd be his first game he's eligible to come back for. Allen Lazard's gutting through some stuff. Samori Touré's been put in positions, but Watson was the second-round pick. He's the guy that when he walks into the room, you go, wow, that's an NFL receiver in terms of how he's built, where he was drafted, and the speed that he has when he's on the field. And, Mike, let's be honest, when Watson's there, at least it's been this way the past month. Maybe you feel differently, but I feel like that's when the Packers offense looks the most like itself.
Absolutely. I believe that 100%. I think because he brings a dimension to the offense that nobody else does, that defenses have a harder time against this Packers offense when he's on the field. And his absence at different times, different reasons, everything else, but his absence over the first 9 games of the season, I think, is one of the biggest reasons this Packers offense is still trying to find itself. And I know there have been issues on the offensive line. His injury has not been the only one at receiver. But if Christian Watson is out there on a regular basis, I think the Packers offense will always look at least a little bit more like we expect it to look.
Yeah, and I know Justin are working the controls here because Matt Arvin is on holiday. I know he doesn't have the Mike Spofford, let's be real moment of the week graphic queued up, but let's be real here about something else. It has been basically the worst case scenario for the Packers at receiver. The plan going into this season was it's Allen Lazard, it's Randall Cobb, it's Sammy Watkins. That's going to be the 3, and you let all the young guys develop from there. Watkins has the hamstring injury. Now he has the knee injury. Lazard ends up having to miss week 1 because of the ankle he got stepped on in practice. And then he gets the shoulder injury, and obviously we know the situation with Cobb. That was going to be what the Packers hang their hat on in the early part of the season. That fell apart. You needed Romeo Doubs. You needed Watson when he's been available, and you've needed Toure to be those guys stepping up. All 3 of them, Mike, they've been playing bigger roles than I think any of us could have anticipated when they're on the field. And you hope going into this second half now they'll be better for it as the Packers try to mount some kind of push.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, looking around the league in Week 10, a couple of games to touch on. First NFL regular season game in Germany on Sunday morning. Seattle against Tampa Bay, an interesting one. Tampa Bay, maybe the Buccaneers found something with that fourth quarter comeback against the Rams last week. Are Tom Brady and the Bucs going to make a push here? Seattle with Geno Smith playing lights out football at quarterback. The Seahawks are the surprise of the NFL as far as I'm concerned so far at roughly the midway point. A couple other games to keep an eye on. Minnesota is at Buffalo. We don't know if Josh Allen is going to play or not with that elbow injury for the Buffalo Bills. And the Vikings, of course, having won 6 consecutive one-score games. And then another cross-conference matchup, the Chargers, who I think maybe after a slow start are starting to find themselves a little bit with Justin Herbert settling in, finding his rhythm a little bit, but now playing at San Francisco, a 49ers team that really feels it's got a lot going for itself with Christian McCaffrey, another offensive weapon added to the mix in the big trade and all that. Those, to me, other than Packers-Cowboys, obviously, at 3:25, those are the 3 other games that are the most intriguing to me on the Week 10 schedule.
Totally. And with the Chargers, too, you wonder, I don't know if Keenan Allen can get back this week. He's been kind of working through a lot of stuff. But, man, if they could just get that guy healthy in terms of the 1-2 punch him and Herbert have been in the early part of his career.
Sure.
Cardinals and Rams is very interesting. You have 2 3-win teams going up against each other. I know
Division
Cliff
rivals,
Kingsbury.
Yeah.
It's been in a tough spot so far. But it is interesting. I go back to that Vikings game because we'll see what happens with Josh Allen. If it's not Allen, then it's Case Keenum, and then there's another storyline there for Minnesota beat writers just getting dropped right into their lap.
Certainly.
But realistically, I'm very interested to see this Minnesota offense go up against this Buffalo defense because Minnesota's not been running the ball as well as they have historically. Now, some of that, again, is Delvin Cook being a little banged up right now, but if this thing gets in Kirk Cousins' hands, how does he react to that? How does he react if the defense isn't getting, prime field position for them? It's not the litmus test it would have been if Josh Allen's 100%.
Right.
But it's still a very intriguing matchup considering when they saw Miami, they were facing Skylar Thompson, and that just wasn't the same offense as it is with Tua or even Teddy Bridgewater.
Well, I mean, Tua's leading the league in passer rating
Yes.
right now. So
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that he missed that game earlier against Minnesota, that completely changed that matchup.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. My last thought, it's too bad Tampa's been on this going through these doldrums they did, because how funny would it have been? Packers and Giants, that was the first time in 15 years there was a winning team versus a winning team in London.
Right.
How funny would that have been if Seattle would be taking on Tampa in the first game in Germany and they both would have been over 500?
Yeah, two
teams
teams with winning records.
But they came one win short of that. So
yeah, well, it's a full Sunday of football with that early game over there in Germany. You can tune in from sun up to sundown to the NFL on Sunday. With that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of Sunday's game against the Cowboys. We will have everything for you from Lambeau Field right here on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time.